Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MR Podcast. The MR Podcast is available on all mainstream radio platforms. Do not miss subscribing to our podcast and connecting with us on platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Do you ever think about how the world needs more people with a mentor mentality? People of all kinds and backgrounds that are willing to care unselfishly about other people, support people, teach people, and most importantly, serve people. Well, the truth is, as human beings, we all have a potential and purpose that matters. That potential and purpose extends to our relationships with other human beings. As the founder of Mentorship Revolution, I believe that being a mentor is more than a career, but in actuality, it is a person that is willing to make intentional choices, intentional sacrifices, and contribute to the world and environment through intentional actions and living. Once we learn as human beings to nurture and encourage the purpose we have as individuals, we begin to understand that we can help others do the same. This is mentorship. The title of today's podcast will be The Power That Lies in Forgiveness. I must say that I am extremely glad to be doing this podcast the same month of my 21st birthday. Forgiveness is an extremely important, relatable, and personal subject for us all. Experiences dealing with forgiveness varies for every person. But at the end of the path, we find that forgiveness is the best remedy for us all, and it brings peace and understanding once conquered. Our wonderful guest today on this weekend, Saturday, will be Aleechea Pitts. Pastor Pitts has an outstanding testimony and story that she isn't afraid to share with the rest of the world. She has gone from a broken vessel to a useful vessel. In her own words, I must say, her work now spans over a decade and includes 4 published books, television, radio, and speaking performances. What can you expect from Pastor Pitts, our wonderful guest today? In today's podcast, you can expect Pastor Pitts to be transparent, truthful, using real life stories paired with relevant scripture to develop a message of love, forgiveness, and self acceptance. So get ready and take your seats. So, right before we jump in, I do have a few announcements that I would like to share. The first will actually be in relation to today's guest. Aleechea Pitts, also known as Pastor Pitts. On February 19th, you can tune in live in effect to the Shekinah Effect at 10 p.m. Must I say be prompt and not late? I will have Pastor Pitts share more about this event. Pastor Pitts, is there more you want to share about the event that's happening on February 19th?
No, I would just say when you come, enter to learn so you can go forth to serve. That is my tagline. Enter to learn so you can go forth to serve.
Yes. So if you are interested and you find that this will be something that can be helpful for you at this time in your life, please tune in. And it's via Zoom, right?
Yes, via Zoom and on Facebook.
Okay, on Facebook as well.
Yes.
Okay. And I also wanted to share that Pastor Pitts has her own podcast known as AP Live Podcast. It is broadcasted every Tuesday starting at 6 p.m. What you can expect. You can expect to learn the scriptures and as well learn more about yourself every time you tune in. I also want to share that our Facebook group for Mentorship Revolution is expanding. And I just want to say thank you for everyone that has followed and is liking. And I just hope that our community can continue to expand. And please share with your friends and family about Mentorship Revolution. On Facebook, you can find us at Mentorship. Okay, so welcome, Pastor Pitts, to the MR Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome.
Thank you for being with us today. And I think that you're a very interesting guest because the subject that you made notice of, forgiveness, I think that that's very relevant for so many people,
Yes.
personal and private.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell anybody you need forgiveness. It doesn't matter what type of relationship it is, whether it's platonic or friendship. At some point in time, you're going to have to exercise forgiveness.
Yes. And so today, our podcast is named The Power That Lies in Forgiveness.
Mhm.
So, based on the title, we know that forgiveness is a powerful act. And with it being such a powerful act, it is important that we ask, how does that act occur? How does forgiveness occur? And we're going to get into that, what it really means to forgive.
Mhm.
So, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Was there something you wanted to say?
Oh, no, no, go ahead. I'll save it.
Okay. We have so much more that's going to be spoken about today. So I thought it was good for us to start with why forgiveness is such a powerful topic of discussion. And we can start with that. So why do we need to talk about forgiveness today?
Well, I have this saying that forgive to live, forgive to live. And many times when you do not forgive, you are stuck in a period of time. There's something that has happened during whatever that time period has happened in your life. And when you are unable to forgive, you are stuck in that space.
Mm,
So, in my own personal um, life story, you're looking at someone that was molested at the ages of 7, 11, and 14. I was held by gunpoint by one of my molesters and also being betrayed by a fellow pastor colleague. And during this particular time, dealing with the pastor, the Lord told me, He said, you cannot move forward until you forgive. You've forgiven all other parties that was a part of this particular situation, and you have to forgive this individual as well. And He told me, He said, until you let it go, you will not be able to move forward. So what happens is you get stuck in a period of time. You
mm,
got people holding on to things for 20 and 30 years. So I always say, when do you go from being a victim to a victor? You cannot stay a victim forever.
yes. Now, on the mention of, your story is very powerful, and, that's very brave of you to share it. But how long did it take before you could share it? Because I know, like, when these things were happening to you and you were being, molested and taken advantage of, how long did it take for you to have the courage to share your testimony?
It took years. It took years. Honestly, I didn't really start sharing the in depths of my story, honestly, until like 2018. Now,
Hmm,
I've
okay.
shared bits and pieces before, but I'm
Right.
talking about to the part where now it's like if you plug in my name in Google, a whole
Okay.
lot of things about me are going to come up.
Okay.
Um, and a lot of that I believe was just part of my healing process, because one thing about it, if you have not been completely healed, you cannot share, or you'll be sharing emotionally. Why? Because you have not had that complete wholeness.
Yes.
And I can honestly say it's nobody but the Lord. I have to, I'm a Christian, so I'm coming from a Christian perspective, and it's nobody but the Lord that I am able to share and be bold about sharing it. And as I always say, I share my story in order to help someone else, to let them know, like, you're not the only one, right? We may not have had the same circumstance or certain same situation, but it is something similar that if you are going through a particular thing, you have someone that can relate to what you've been going through.
Right. So I would like to ask about your background. How was your family? How were you raised? Your background? Were you raised in a Christian household?
Yes, I was raised. I always tell people I was practically near born at the altar. I am
Oh,
a fourth generation preacher, so I
okay.
have a lot of pastors and preachers in my family. So definitely was born and raised in church. Um, my father and my mother, they were married for 14 years and then they end up getting a divorce. I have another sibling. I have another sibling who is 3 years younger than I. Have a brother who stays in California. So my immediate family was kind of small. Now, growing up for myself, it was a little hard for me growing up because I never fit in. I was kind of like
Okay.
pepper in the midst of salt. And so God had his hand on my life at an early age. Kids at school were calling me Pastor Pitts when I was in grade school. And it
Mm,
wasn't that I was in
mm,
school quoting scriptures or anything. It was just that God had set me apart.
right.
And so I was picked on, experienced a lot of rejection. Now, coming up, I knew my family loved me, but I always wanted that outside acceptance. And so,
Right.
even with the book that was written, Let It Go for Your Sake, Forgive, who better to talk about forgiveness than a person who has gone through um, childhood trauma and just different things like I have? I always tell people, um, you can have people that talk from head knowledge, but when someone is giving you coming from their own experience, it comes across a whole lot differently. It reaches a person deeper because that person has experienced it personally.
Right. So when you first began, I would like for you to share with us your experience in becoming an ordained minister.
Okay. Well, my first message that I preached, I was 14 years old, and I'll never forget
Hmm.
it. It was Jesus loves the little children.
Okay.
There was an evangelist who was from Alabama, and she had kind of like joined my grandfather's church at that time, and I was asked to bring forth a message, and it was pretty much prophetically spoken to me that I would eventually be a leader. And so in coming into being a ordained minister, eventually I end up leaving my grandfather's church and joining another ministry, which was a deliverance ministry. And
Okay.
it was a ministry that I needed because when I was at my grandfather's church, after a certain amount of time, I needed more spiritually.
Mhm.
If I was going to stay committed to God, I knew that I needed more, or I would have found myself back out in the world. And
Mhm.
so when I joined this deliverance ministry, I really began to be involved in the ministry. I was on the praise and worship team. I was a Sunday school teacher. I was a tutor for the pastor kids. I
Mm.
was the armor bearer to the pastor. So I had my hands in in almost everything.
Yeah.
No gift was lying dormant. And so at this
Okay.
particular ministry, um, I got ordained first as a missionary, and from a missionary I got ordained. Some years went by, got ordained as an evangelist.
Mhm.
I ended up leaving that ministry, and you're talking about maybe like a decade later, then I got ordained and installed as a pastor. So here it is again, process, right? A lot of times
Process.
people just want to wake up and be an overnight wonder, but it's
Mhm.
it's a process. Even when you put a seed in the ground, the next day fruit don't appear. It's a process. There's a toiling that goes on. And so I always like to say, I am who I am today because of the process that I went through. Eat the good, the bad, and the ugly was that
Mm.
process. And I honestly would not take anything. I wouldn't redo anything over, even the traumatic things, because
Right.
had I not have gone through certain things, I wouldn't be able to help people. Today I
Yeah.
ministered to a gentleman. I was on the phone with him from 1 o'clock to almost 3 o'clock today.
Mhm.
He contacted me, And I always tell people I have many facets to my story. I always like to say like this: ex-gay to reverend. So now God has allowed me to be in a position to help people who are looking to come out of homosexuality. And so
Mhm.
this particular gentleman, he saw my story on Change Movement. And he said, I seen many stories, and it was an encouragement to me. He said, I seen many stories on here. He said, but when I saw your story, he said, it rang out to me that you were truly delivered. He said, I seen some other ones and it was kind of like, but he said, it rang out to me that you were really, truly delivered and that you would be able to help me. And so it was just an encouragement to he had bought one of my books. I have another book out that's called Homosexuality is In, Heterosexuals Relax. And I share my
Mhm.
story there. And that is a book to educate the church on how to love the homosexual and those who are looking to come out of the lifestyle, also giving them that process of deliverance. And so when he reached out to me, I told him, I said, well, let's start with you getting the book. You get the book, you
Mhm.
read it, and then after you read it, you contact me, and I can see how I can help you in your process.
Right.
And he told me he said it was so good. He said he read the book within 2 days, and he had all the questions lined up. And one thing about deliverance, you have to want deliverance, right?
Mhm.
It's just like counseling. There's no point in counseling someone who is not going to be honest, because the
Yes.
big part of it is being honest, right?
Mhm.
And so I told him, I said, well, you're a step ahead because you want the deliverance. It's hard. You can't counsel someone that don't want change, and
Mhm.
they are not willing to do the work.
Mhm.
And so I shared with him, I when he said that, I said, well, I believe that God, because I am fully delivered, has now allowed people to reach out to me. Because one thing about it, you have some people, if you have broken people trying to help broken people, the situation can end up a whole lot worse, right? And so,
Tiring.
you know,
Very
and
tiring.
so after he had contacted me, then I had a young lady contact me that was dealing with same-sex attraction. And she
Okay.
said she just was Googling and my name came up.
Mhm.
Now, mind you, she's seeing a therapist, but she said I felt as though I needed some pastoral counseling. And
Yeah.
so when people come to me, and that's the first thing I say, if you're asking me to counsel you, it's going to be number one from a Christian perspective, but it's going
Mhm.
to be according to what the Bible says as well. And so I'm just grateful. And just like I told the gentleman today, I didn't get here overnight. There was a process. I didn't dot all my I's. I didn't cross all my T's, and I'm talking about after I got saved. I'm talking
Right.
about after I was preaching, right?
Okay.
And this is part of the most recent book that I've written that's called Memoirs of a Pastor, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I'm not
Okay.
perfect, I'm only human. Because at the end of the day, none of us are perfect. But there
No.
comes a point in your life as you get older and as you grow and you learn, right? Should be learning from life's lessons that I'm 47 years old. I still shouldn't be having the mindset of a 21-year-old, right? There should be
Mhm.
some type of growth going on. And so that particular book is to help people, like, look, you're going to go through a process, but the whole key about it is learning those lessons, right? Not being we're talking about forgiveness. Let's go back to that. Not being a repeat offender, because you're either on one side of that coin of forgiveness. You are the offender, or you are the offended. Either you are causing the offense or you are receiving the offense.
Mm.
So the question is what side of the coin you are on. And I can
Right.
even add to that forgiveness piece. There's a free ebook on my website that I talk about learning how to apologize. That's another side of forgiveness, right? We don't want
Mhm.
to, and when we don't want to apologize, that's pride.
Mm.
We don't want to humble ourselves enough. But I'm a firm believer. I live my life in such a way that when, God forbid, if I get on my sick bed, I don't want to have to be calling people talking about, oh, can you please forgive me? Can you go find so and so? No, I want to die in peace, right?
Yes.
I want to
Oh
die
yeah.
in peace. So I try to live my life in that way where the Bible talks about don't let the sun go down on your wrath, right? Not going to bed angry and all that kind of carrying on. T.D. Jakes, he says something. He said, when you get angry, he said, it is important that you try to let that go at least within 5 minutes. Because the longer you hold on to it, the harder it is to let it go. And it's the same thing with forgiveness. The longer you hold on to it, the harder it is to let it go, because then it starts getting down here into the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Now it becomes a heart matter.
It
And
does.
once it gets down into the heart, it's going to take a while, because now you're dealing with emotions, you're dealing with
Thoughts.
feelings. And this
Mm-hmm.
is why it's so hard for people to forgive people, because they stuck with how they feel. And so, with that being said, because you are stuck with the way you feel about the situation, you have to make a choice to forgive. I choose to forgive, and I'll keep choosing to forgive until my heart matches up with my choice. So then I have to do it in on purpose. I got to do it intentionally to make that choice to forgive, even though within myself I really ain't feeling it right now. So that's why it can't be based on feeling, because if it was based on our feelings, we would never forgive.
Right. Well, so as we speak about forgiveness, there's an old adage that says time heals all wounds. And has that been true to your experience, or has it required so much more than just time? Because I know you said it's a process, that's
Yeah, it
required living
yeah,
day in and day out.
yeah, it definitely requires more than time. What I find, and especially in dealing with people, is whether you want to do that work or not. It goes back to what I said about deliverance, right? In order for you to experience deliverance, you got to want that deliverance. You got to have that desire to want to forgive. And if you don't have that desire to want to forgive, then you're going to be struggling with it. So that's the big bulk of it, is you doing your part of that forgiveness piece. Um, because if you don't do that part, then it makes it more difficult to you to get for you to get over it. So yeah, it does include time, but it's more than time. It's going to be work. You're going to have to do your due diligence to to do that inner work in you in order for you to move forward. And when it comes to the forgiveness piece.
Okay. So we've moved thoroughly like into our conversation about you shared your testimony, which I feel as the guest, that's incredibly important for us to know how you with forgiveness being something that was on your heart to talk about today, how has that been something in part of your life, in your personal testimony? And you had a very, very touching special testimony that I think was important for to be a part of this podcast. And I think as well with you going through molestation, and
Mhm.
has that been like, was that your hardest challenge in forgiving? Because I know for most people that will be on the top of the list.
Honestly, I'm gonna say it was not my hardest challenge. I would say was probably with the betrayal with the pastor colleague. Um, I think with the molestation, I believe the reason why it was not a big challenge for me, because number one, I was a child. So at that point in time of my life, um, I could not comprehend all that had happened to me.
Yes.
So I think that's what made the difference as far as that not being the hardest challenge. I've even experienced as a child um, harassment on the job, and I'll never forget it. This guy was, I was about 14. He was probably like in his late 20s or a little bit older, and he was harassing me at the job. And years later, I hadn't seen him for a while, and I
Hmm.
was up at a particular church doing praise and worship, and guess who walks through the door? It's him. And so while I'm up there singing praise and worship, now my mind is going all over the place because I hadn't seen this guy for years. And so after the service, he came to me and asked for forgiveness. And I gave it to him. I gave it to him without thought. And this is another thing that I teach people when it comes to forgiveness. There are some people that God has put it in them that they can easily forgive. It's part of their makeup. There are
Mm-hmm.
some people, if they are easily to get offended or they sensitive, those are the ones that usually have a hard time letting things go. So a lot of it too is however God, whatever your characteristics are. For me, I believe that God has put it in me where I can easily forgive. But like I said, the hardest one I would say was me having to forgive that pastor colleague for betrayal.
Yes. And I can understand why you would say that that was the hardest challenge in forgiveness because, as you said, usually when we're younger, we are in these situations that, we may go through these things in our childhood or as a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe it's the naiveness, maybe it's the
Mm-hmm.
innocence that doesn't allow us to see the situation in depth.
Mm-hmm.
But many years later, as we get older, I think it can go both ways, though. I think for
Absolutely.
some people, it can devastate them more to
Oh yeah.
realize
Mm-hmm.
that they had endured that.
Yes.
So it's kind of
Yes.
like this: the switch is the switch is flipped, and it kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, while at the time they just kept right on moving, not really knowing that they were going through those things. It just,
Mm-hmm.
but then years later, as an adult, sometimes it's like it triggers and.
Yes. 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 And that's why I tell people, um, forgiveness is a process. Now, I've heard people say, "Oh, when you're a Christian, it shouldn't be a process." But I would
Oh,
have to
I don't believe.
disagree with that. It has to
Yes,
be
I
a
do too.
process because, like you said, you can get older if you don't go through that. I call it, what people do sometimes. They do what I call blanket forgiveness, and you can't do blanket forgiveness. You have to. Sometimes you got to name offenders. You got to be detailed about the situation. So when God forbid something happens that may seem similar, then you don't get triggered when you
Okay.
walk through that process. So I always tell people forgiveness is definitely, it is a process. And like I said, you don't want to be, when you don't go through that process, then your some of your relationships are being hindered. Why? Because now you don't trust people. You stereotype people, right? Put everybody
Mhm.
in the same category. When these individuals did not do that to you, it was somebody else. So that's why it's important that we walk through that process, as you said, so we don't get those triggers. So you definitely have, and here it is again, you
Mhm.
have to do the work. You got to be willing to confront it, right? You got
Mhm.
to be willing to deal with it. And a lot of times people don't want to deal with it. And so when they don't want to deal with it, then they're stuck. And then there's some people, honestly, some people don't want to move forward from it. Why? Because they're used to the attention. They want the sympathy and the empathy and
Pity
all those different
party.
things. So here it is again. That individual really has to be honest with themselves. Because that's why I said, at some point in time, you should be going from a victim to a victor. But if you're not willing to do the work, then you're going to stay stuck. And some people are like that, where they will go to whoever here. They really don't want a resolution. They just want people to hear. But you got to go from that to actually doing the work so you can be healed. But a lot of times people don't want to be healed because they like that attention. Um, as negative as it may be, they like that attention. So they'll never work on that process of being fully healed. So here it is again. It definitely starts with you. You gotta want it. And how bad do you want it? If you want to come to a place of complete wholeness, then you have to do the work. And sometimes it may require a professional to come in, right?
Mhm.
A professional to come in. Let me tell you how good God is. Now I'm currently seeing a psychotherapist, and I began to share with her some things that happened in my childhood, because mind you, when I was going through what I was going through in childhood, I really did not receive counseling like I should have received counseling.
Many.
When
Yep.
I saw the counselor that they had me go see, we never even talked about what happened to me. It was about, how are you doing at school, things of that nature. But
Mm.
never, the trauma was never really talked about. And so here it is now. I'm 47 years old, and talking to the psychotherapist, and she said, well, I can honestly say through your spirituality, you've come to a great place where some people, even if they say they have spirituality, they have not even arrived at the place that you have arrived. So I know that, and it's kind of funny. It's like God said, okay, because you didn't have this when you were younger, I'm gonna allow you to have it now. So it's kind of like bringing that whole thing full
Yes.
circle. And it's so funny because nothing happens by happenstance.
No.
This therapist bought my forgiveness book, right?
Oh
And
wow.
she showed me she had bought it and everything. And so she began to start questioning me about different things about forgiveness.
Mhm.
And so she said to me, she said, who's the counselor, me or you? And we both bust out, start laughing, right?
Yeah.
And then she said to me, she said, I'm going to recommend all my colleagues for them to recommend this book, any of their clients that is dealing with unforgiveness and stuff like that. She said, I'm going to recommend it to all my colleagues if they have any clients that is dealing in that area, for them to get your book. So nothing happens by happenstance, right? As I'm helping her, she's also helping me. So
Yes.
so God does things all well. So like I said, I just believe that God just said, okay, I'm gonna allow you at this point in time of your life to see a psychotherapist. Even though you may be seeing her about anxiety in regards to this coronavirus, I'm gonna allow you to even touch some stuff that was back in your childhood, that you can have a conversation with someone with no judgment. Whatever you want to say, I'm giving you that space and that opportunity to do that. And so I tell people all the time, you may have this, if the pastoral counseling alone is not working, then you may want to go see a therapist.
Yes.
But here it is again, at the end of the day, any type of counseling, you got to be honest with yourself. And many times sometimes we deceive our own selves, because we'll play that part like, oh, I'm good, I'm all right. And within yourself, you're not all right, but you're putting on this facade like you're okay. And the thing is, God has given us many resources. So there's no excuse why we have to stay in an unhealthy place when you have the resources at hand to be able to work on you to bring yourself out of that.
That was a very powerful story you sharing about you going to a psychotherapist. And
Mhm.
me myself, I think like the hardest thing is that when it comes to forgiveness, we kind of would much rather, like you said, delay the process. We rather just, I don't know how we think we're going to deal with the reality of the things that have occurred, the things that have
Mhm.
been done, because I think the most painful thing, do you think this is the case, is that you have to deal with that every day. You have to work through it. The
You
things that
definitely,
have,
you have,
yeah.
yeah, you have to work through it. And that's why I always tell people, like, I always put this disclaimer out here. I said, please don't contact me. Because the
Okay.
thing is, if you're not willing to do the work, don't waste your time and don't waste mine either.
Yes,
Because
I
at the end
agree.
of the day, it's on you. Nobody can do this for you. You have to do it. And part of that, if you are a Christian, part of that is building yourself up through prayer, building yourself up through the Word of God, building up your relationship
Mm-hmm.
with God, right? And then God will either send someone in your life, or you find someone that you can be vulnerable with and
Yes.
really be honest with, so you can begin to start working on that wholeness. Because one thing, um, even as a child, I always knew, like, okay, when I get married, I don't want to put no type of issues on my husband, because my husband wasn't the one that offended me.
Mm-hmm.
So here it is again, as a child, I already knew, look, I want to be at a place where I'm not giving this man an issue, right?
Mhm.
Because he had nothing to do with it. So my prayer has always been, God, I want to be completely whole before I get married, right? I don't want to get married and now me and my husband, we're experiencing sexual issues because I didn't deal with what I needed to deal with,
Mhm.
and bring that wholeness. And that's why I'm saying that's why forgiveness is so important, because it can affect,
Other
it affects
areas.
every area of your life, right? Even as
Mhm.
a Christian, the Bible says when you pray, when you stand praying, forgive. Because if you, how, even the Bible says also, if you want forgiveness, you got to give it.
Yep.
So it touches so many parts, right? And I don't know about nobody else. And I always say it like this: no one is that important that I would allow them to hinder my prayer that I need to get to God. There's nobody that important. So it's definitely a serious matter, and you definitely have to be honest with yourself, because many times we will deceive ourselves. Like I said, we will lie to ourselves. We saying we okay, and then like you said, a trigger happens. That's how you know
Mhm.
when you get over, when you can get over stuff. Like when you can meet your offenders and you don't feel no kind of way on the inside. That's how you know
Mhm.
when you really healed. You
Yes.
know.
Yeah.
So even like the situation with the pastor colleague, we reconciled, but the relationship is not the same. But when I see them, we
Okay.
embrace each other and
Mm.
we speak. I'm
Mhm.
not talking to them every day. They don't call me. I don't call them. But when we're in public, we are able to genuinely greet one another, embrace one another, and keep it moving. And that's how you know when you truly have forgiven, because you'll treat the person as if they never did it in the first place. It's just like when God forgives us, right? When we ask God for forgiveness, He treats us as if we never sinned in the first place.
Mhm.
And that's what true forgiveness. I like to use the simple definition of extending grace to others.
Yes.
And what I
Mhm.
always like to ask this question is, if you were the person that offended,
Would you want
wouldn't
forgiveness?
you want someone to forgive you? Wouldn't you want someone to extend mercy and grace to you? And nine
Right.
times out of 10, the question is yeah. you
Yeah.
know so that's the way we have to look at it, is if that was me, the shoe was on the other foot,
Right.
would I want someone to forgive me? Would I want someone to extend grace to me, to show mercy upon me? And yeah, I would.
Now, what if on the other hand that person has an attitude of, well, I didn't do nothing in the first place, and the only reason I did what I did. Some people never that has committed that offense never take accountability. Do you think that makes forgiveness harder, or you still have to be accountable for forgiving that person even when they won't take accountability for their actions?
I think that it does make forgiveness harder, but here it is, at the end of the day, in this sense, you have to be selfish with you. My pastor used to preach this message all the time. We're not held accountable for what other people do.
Yes.
We're held accountable for our own actions. And here it is again. When you stay in unforgiveness, it's as if you're saying that person has power over you to control you. And I'm not going to allow no one to have that much power over me, that they control my mood, that when I see you in the grocery store, now I'm in this funk. She need to go on somewhere. Go to a, all that kind of carrying on. No,
Mhm.
you're allowing that person to exercise that power over you. So at the end of the day, what's best for you is to forgive, because here it is, it's affecting your relationships with people. It's affecting your prayer life. God ain't hearing you when you ain't prayed. He said lay your gift at the altar. Then he said lay your gift at the altar, go to that person, and if they don't receive you, you shake the dust, but at least you've done your due diligence, you've done your part.
Mhm.
And a lot of it, honestly, unforgiveness too, there's a form of pride in there, right?
Pride is
Because we
major.
feel entitled to feel the way we feel, right?
That's major.
And you may be right to feel angry, but at some point in time you got to move from that place. You
Mhm.
got, because you think about it, people that hold on to unforgiveness, most of them, they're not happy. Look at their life, they're miserable. because you holding on to stuff. And at the same time, when you hold on to stuff like that, you start blaming other people for how the way your life is. You know, you begin to start looking for scapegoats, right? Somebody could have been and asked that person for forgiveness, and they don't want to give it, they don't want to release it, right? You're you, this is how I always say it.
Yeah.
The people the people that have hurt you, they sleeping at night. They ain't studying you.
Mm.
So why not work on you? Why not work on you to that place of wholeness and being happy? That's why I say forgive to live. There's another way to live. Keep going back to love. Keep going back to love. Because at the end of the day, there's going to be something. The Bible says we all have offended in word and deed. Nobody exempt. We've all
Mm-hmm.
said stuff we shouldn't have said. We all done things that we shouldn't have done. Remember, I said we done been on both sides of this coin. You either hurt somebody or you received hurt. But we've
Yeah.
all, nobody exempt, no person exempt. We've all done hurt people. We all done said stuff, even if you didn't think you hurt them, right? People can misread your body language, all these different things. But at the end of the day, the truth of the matter is we all done said stuff at one point in time we shouldn't have said. We all done stuff and hurt people, and we should not have done that. So we both been on that flip side of the coin. So when your day come, if you don't forgive, guess what? You're not going to receive forgiveness. If you want mercy, you got to show mercy. You want grace, you got to extend grace. It's twofold, right? Many of the promises in the Bible, he'll say, you do this and I'll do that. So there's some things that we got to do. God just don't take everything away from us. There's some things that we got to do.
Right. Well, that was just so much. Okay. Well, I think like I want to talk more about the victimizing, like oftentimes seeing yourself as the victim of some trauma, or maybe something was committed against you,
Mm-hmm.
and we see it as intentional a lot of times, that these
Mm-hmm.
people intentionally did this to me, because how could they have not known,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So I know from seeing it that when you see a person who is still laying like in that victim state, it's they can be in that in their 50s. They can get
Yes.
very old, and it's like these things that occurred to them when they were very much younger, they
Mm-hmm.
still talk about it, and
Yes.
it still weighs on them. And you can
Mm-hmm.
kind of see the trickle down effect, how because they never healed the
Yes.
sequence of events,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it can be their relationships. Maybe they had a hard time managing long-term relationships,
Yes.
or it could be that it just seems like that's kind of what happens. But I think the most awful thing about unforgiveness is how it just falls over. Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, it may have been something that happened to you as a child, but it's affecting your marriage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think, like you said, the forgiveness is something that you have to do, but the power that lies in it, of course, is the healing and
Yes.
recovery.
Yes.
And I think, like I said, the thing that we have to accept is oftentimes that recovery. To me, from my experience, it happens over time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I would say many times people on the outside may not know that you're in that process.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And I think for some people, depending on who you are, I don't know, like that you're in that process. But do you think that like is you tell when a person is sitting in unforgiveness? Can you tell, like, say you know that person and you're close to them? Are
I
you able
believe
to?
you can tell, and you've touched on it already. How they talk, if they always bringing up the incident. Remember,
Right.
I said forgiveness is you're treating that person as if they never did it. When you truly forgive, you don't reach back. as soon as you can and throw it up in someone else's face,
Yes.
right? It's just
Mhm.
like married couples. There are people that are married that really should be divorced because they never forgave the spouse for whatever it was that they had done, but they use that as a tool of manipulation to get what they want out of the individual, to bring about shame, to bring guiltiness and condemnation, all that kind of carrying on. And if that person is doing that to you, y'all need to go y'all separate. If they're not going to move, if they're not going to forgive, there's no point in staying in that relationship, because now the other person is being wounded, right? Because now you're holding this. The Bible says love keeps no record of wrong. See,
Mhm.
when you truly love, you're not tallying up. Okay, you did this last year, no, so that's like you said, conversation is a real big one, because most of the time when people can't get over stuff, eventually they keep rehashing it over and over and over again. And here it is again. This person may have asked the person to forgive them,
Mhm.
but for whatever reason, that person, the offended person, is stuck. They cannot move. But see, again, nobody can do it for you. You got to do it for yourself. Nobody,
Mhm.
nobody can do it for you. And even in scripture, when he says, when you stand praying, forgive, it
Mhm.
don't say, I'm going to help you to forgive. No, it's something that we got to do. It's a work
Right.
that we got to do. And I always like to say it like this: if we would just practice empathy,
Mhm.
that would help you a whole lot. Because I remember an incident that happened, and I didn't put it in the book, but it was an incident that happened where there was a person that I really admired. And what ended up happening was, this individual, at that time I was pastoring the church, and this individual will ask about this particular person, like, how's so and so doing? And I would say, oh, they doing good and everything. And I'm thinking that they were asking out of genuine care and concern. But what the reason why they were asking, because
They
they
how
was
low they
trying,
feel. How low they
huh?
feel. Were they trying to see how low they feel and if their life was getting worse and they were
Yeah,
reaping what
and
they had
and
sowed?
and yeah, and so they were trying to find out where they were spiritually. And
Okay.
so what happens is, after some time, this individual comes to me, and what ended up happening was, first the person put a post out on Facebook, and they tagged every leader that I knew. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? And in the post it said, how do you tell your leader uh 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 something has happened by somebody that they admire? And so eventually the person comes to me, and they start crying, and they said, Pastor, I'm so sorry. And so what was going on was, this leader was asking one of my members to do sexual favors. And so at that time, when the member brought it to me, I called the individual right there while the member was there. Couldn't get a hold of him at that time.
Mhm.
God does all things well. I guess God said, look, let's calm you down before you get to this individual. When I eventually got a hold of the individual, I had to look at myself. Let me tell you, was I hurt? Did I feel betrayed? Yes, I did. But I had to look at myself to say, how many times, if God would have exposed me, how
Mm.
many times would I bring reproaches on other churches, on other ministries, for the things that I've done? Talking about empathy, right? In order to be able to forgive. And it was nobody but the Lord. I know it was nobody but the Lord, because in myself, there's no way I could have done it. I end up turning around counseling this gentleman. The gentleman ended up asking me, he said, can I'm just asking you to do one thing. He said, please don't stop being my friend. And I said to him, and I know it was nobody but God, I said, I won't stop being your friend. I said, but you got to give me some time on this one. Then look what happens. After I talked to him, some time went on. His wife calls me. What's going on?
Mm.
Had to end up telling the wife, And guess what? End up counseling them both. Now, mind you, this particular individual, if I wasn't where I needed to be, I could have extorted them out for money because they was connected to a big organization that everybody knows, all of that.
Mm.
But I had to look at myself.
Mm.
Aleechea, if that was you, how would you want someone to treat me? And you know what he turned around and said? He said, thank you so very much. Because what I ended up doing was I ended up going to one of his higher ups and telling them what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I thank you. He said, I thank you how you handled the situation. Because he knew I could have been on the 6 o'clock news with that information. He
Mm-hmm.
said, but I thank you for how you handled the situation. He said, and because of the way you handle it, I'm now able to get help.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and but I just put my I just looked at myself, and I was able to not only minister to him but not even be angry towards him, you
Right.
know. And so empathy plays a big part. It plays a big part, and here it is again. You have to be willing to do that work, because when you part of forgiveness is freedom. There's
Mm-hmm.
freedom. You're not weighted down. You know what I mean? You and true forgiveness, here it is again. You're not being leery of people that come in your life, right? Because some people they say they forgive, but then you like Sherlock Holmes when everybody come into your life. You know, you're leery. And that's one thing I did not want. That was my prayer too with God. God, I don't want to be when people hurt me. I don't want to be leery of everybody that come into my life, because everybody that's coming into my life is not here to hurt me. There's just sometimes we just done some stupid thing we wasn't thinking, right? See,
Mm-hmm.
there's a difference when you hurt someone and you didn't mean to hurt them, and then when you are connecting to people where you are really in your mind, you already know that you're trying to intentionally hurt them. The Bible calls them type of people false brethren. False brethren will connect to you knowing that they have an underlying motive in mind to bring some kind of harm to you, whether it's defamation of character, slander, or some other kind of stuff going on. But when you just we you gotta remember, we're human beings, right? You're dealing with human beings, so somebody gonna do something to hurt you. Somebody gonna say
Mm-hmm.
something to get on your nerves. This is all part of being human, you know. But when you look at the contents of people's heart, and like you said something, and I want to touch on that. The process of the offender. For instance, for people, especially people that have been sexually abused, a lot of times you look in these people's background, they've been abused themselves and they never even received the help that they needed either. Not
Mm-hmm.
that it makes it right, but looking at the whole picture, looking at the whole picture. And like Paul said, if it wasn't for the grace of God, there go I, right? I could
Mm-hmm.
easily been put in that situation. So it's just important that we when we look at it like that, then it helps you to forgive, right? It helps you because look, it could be it's them today, it could be me tomorrow,
Yes.
you know. So
Right. And um, so I would like to say as well, I was thinking about how, so, okay, forgiveness. So, do you ever think that there's like a day where you just completely forgiven, or is it always that process? Because I know from my experience, it's a process, but do you think that it can be that instant deliverance where I've forgiven them and I'm never going to struggle with forgiving them again? It's just forgiven. Is that realistic? Does that ever really happen?
I believe it can happen. It's
Okay.
all predicated on the individual. It's just like, think about it with the healing process. 9 times out of 10, it's up to you how fast you heal. Think about when you get a scar. Some people, they don't heal well because they always picking at the scab.
Won't leave it alone.
You,
Right.
you see what I'm saying? You keep picking at the scab, or because we talking about that process of forgiveness, right? You picking at the scab, or you ain't keeping it clean. So then infection sets in it.
Okay.
So here it is again. That work is on you. You know what I mean? That so you can stay in that healthy place. That work is
Mhm.
on you. Now I can honestly say, like I said, you and plus you'll like I said, you'll know when you come to that full forgiveness, because when you see the person, you ain't feeling no kind of way. When you see the person, like how I was able to do with this individual, I can see them and greet them genuinely. I can embrace them. We hug and say, "Hey, how you doing?" You know what I mean? We don't call
Right.
each other on. Now, before all of that happened, I was over their house, they was over my house. We would be on the phone. None of that is happening now. But when I
Right.
see them in public and they see me in public, we greet each other and it's genuine. And it's
Okay.
genuine. And that's how you'll know when you've really walked into that forgiveness. When you really walked in that full forgiveness, you ain't bringing, even if they were to do something right now,
Your
you're not reaching
reaction.
back to that.
Mhm.
You're starting from that point on, right? And
Mhm.
moving forward. And that's how
Yes.
you really know when you have truly forgiven, when you're not uh, uh, completely rehashing it, or like I said, you feeling some kind of way. As soon as you see them, something in you move and all of that. That's how you know when
Mhm.
you ain't really forgiven. But there's a place that you can come to, and remember, I like to say it like this: if it was based on feelings, we would never forgive, because we stuck with how we feel. Right? Your feelings, your emotions, that's real. That's natural to you.
Okay.
That's your reality.
Well,
And that's why a lot of people don't forgive, because they're stuck with their emotions. So that's why you got to choose. I got to continue to choose to forgive you till my emotions match up with my choice.
right. So, what about those that seem numb? Because I know the numbing process can occur too when you've been hurt so much. So they may not have those outrageous reactions. They may not come off with so much emotion,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still not really a good thing to be numb either.
No. And here it is, going back to what I said before, being honest with yourself. Being honest with yourself and allowing yourself to feel, because we ain't no robots. God made us emotional and social creatures. So if it hurts you and you feel like crying, cry. It's okay. The whole part of it is not staying being stuck. Express the emotion, acknowledge it. That's all part of, it's almost kind of like part of the grieving process.
Mhm.
And it was something that you mentioned earlier, and even I've advised people and done uh, and taught on grieving process. Right? You'll have some people, something has happened to them, and the people around you, they're looking at you like, I wish you get over it already. Right?
Mhm.
And sometimes they may give you a time frame. Like in a grieving process, most of the time, most people, they looking for people to get over stuff within about a year or so. After that, it's like, all right, get over it already. And that's why it's important, like we said, about your support system,
Yes.
who you got around you. Because if you have somebody that's insensitive, then that could do more harm than good. Right? They insensitive about where you are at that point, then now there's more damage to the situation. So it's important to have the right kind of people around you. But again, when we are talking about wanting to be whole, that's the question: do you want to be made whole, or are
Mhm.
you making excuses? Because remember how the man at the pool of Bethesda, Jesus asked him, "Do you want to be made whole?" That's a yes or no question, is it not?
Yes, it is.
But the man at the pool, he was like, "Well, every time I get ready to step down in the water, somebody stepped before me." He started bringing out all these excuses. And all Jesus asked him was, "Do you want to be made whole?" So that's the first question. Do you want to be made whole?
Mhm.
And if you want to be made whole, if the answer is yes, then you will do what it takes to be whole, which means working on you, confronting some things, being honest, allowing yourself to feel, allowing yourself to acknowledge those feelings, and then begin to work on that inner work. Begin to work on that inner work.
And for me, I think the greatest lesson in forgiveness is being willing to accept that in those relationships, because a lot of times these things are occurring in our family. our
Yes.
loved ones, those closest to us.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the greatest thing is I believe you can forgive and understand that God may be closing the door on some of those relationships.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I talk about setting healthy boundaries. Like I said,
Right.
me and that
Okay.
particular pastor, we ain't on the phone talking. You know what I mean? We ain't visiting one another. But when I see them in public, I can embrace them without feeling some kind of way, and I can speak to them without feeling some kind of way. So yeah, there are times you have to set those healthy boundaries, and that's okay. And prayerfully, you are in the place to know which ones you need to set boundaries with, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with you. Every relationship will not be restored.
Mhm. Yes. And as well, before we end this podcast, I also would like to say is what you're saying in your mind about that person. Because you
Yes.
don't even have to, at the end of the day, we all have our own system, mind, body, and spirit, which God has access to it all. He sees it all.
Right.
So, because some people, they manifest the symptoms very openly, and other people, it may look
Mm-hmm.
like they're happy, they may have the house, the car, the family, but they're still dealing with unforgiveness themselves. But to me,
Absolutely.
right. So to me, if what you're thinking about that person is thoughts such as, like the Bible says it itself, you're thinking loving thoughts about that person, you
Mm-hmm.
wish them nothing but well. But
Mm-hmm.
if you still gossiping, talking about them, and
Yes.
saying they're going to get what they deserve, and
Yes.
just
Yes.
kind of leaving that door open because you're still wounded, it's
Yes.
just much better to come to a peaceful solution about it, in
Right.
your mind, because unfortunately, sometimes in reality, we don't always get to go back to that person and talk to them. Sometimes they just walk out of
Absolutely.
your life and you're left
Absolutely.
dealing with it all on your own, but you have to still follow those steps to forgive them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one thing. And I like you bringing that out because even in scripture, he says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speak. So even still, if you don't do a physical manifestation, you still in prison in your mind and in your heart and in your spirit. Still, at the end of the day, you can put on the front all day long, but you know within yourself that you're not happy. And that's all that part about acknowledging and just really, really, really being honest about just keeping it real, right? Really being honest with yourself about it. So, it's definitely something that it requires work, but I guarantee you the freedom that comes with it. It's you exercise, even this is scientifically proven. You use more energy frowning than you do smiling.
Mm,
You exerting all that energy. We talking about the mind. I always say this: you can't think negative and speak positive at the same time. So even if you, when thoughts come, speak the opposite of what the thought is. Here it is
control and
again. As
subdue.
you be consistent, then it's not like you're working so hard at it. It's
Yeah,
like when you
a
tell
practice.
somebody no. There are people in the world, they have a problem of saying no to people, but the more you say no, the easier it becomes. So here it is again. You got to do it on purpose, because right now your heart, your emotions, your feelings is not there. So that's why you got to just simply make a choice.
Hmm.
And as you continue to make that choice, eventually, next thing you know, your heart done matched up to the choice. Now it's not egregious. It don't feel like a chore, like, oh man, I got to do this. No, because now it's coming from another place,
Right.
which is love, right? Love is the greatest power. Love, he said, faith, love, and hope. All of them three things you need, you know. And so it's just important that as I said, let it go for your sake. Forgive. It's for your sake that you do it. It ain't got nothing to do with nobody else. It's for your benefit that you do it.
Yeah. And I think before we end this podcast, the most unfortunate thing is most people aren't taught that forgiveness is for their sake. So they just live their life learning the hard way. They never get to that higher purpose God has for them.
Mhm.
So they kind of fall short of their destiny because unforgiveness, it can rot away at something, because it can affect your relationship with your children. It can affect your
Mm-hmm.
relationship with your family,
Yes.
your marriage partner. It can cause divorce. There's just so many things that
Yes. And it affects your
unforgiveness.
health. It
Oh
affects
yeah.
your health. It's been scientifically proven that many cancer patients, in particular, were dealing with unforgiveness.
Mm.
So it internal, it manifests in your body too. You got wrinkles in your forehead from frowning all the time. All kind of manifestations happen.
Mm-hmm.
It happens.
Right. So, and the greatest thing, this is the final message before we end today's podcast, the power that lies in forgiveness. The greatest thing is that I believe God, whether you're a believer or unbeliever, I do believe that there are so many opportunities we get to encounter that breakthrough
Mm-hmm.
that could be the deliverance, and that could lead to us forgiving, because sometimes we forgive people and they're dead and they're not even,
Mm-hmm.
but you can still have been holding that, which I've never had that experience, but just imagine you
Yeah.
still holding it, and that person,
Yeah.
it's like you're wrestling with yourself, in the
Yeah.
end. That's the
Yeah. And
unforgiveness. Yeah.
yeah, I had someone ask me, they was like, what do you tell people? What do you tell people if they don't never get the apology? That's why you gotta let it go for your sake. Because if you're looking for somebody to apologize to you, you may not never get it.
Mm,
You see, that's why that's enough. That's why you got to move on. Whether they living or dead, you may not never get it.
mm-hmm.
So here it is again. It's about you. It's God. I always say this: God can deal with them better than I can.
Mm-hmm.
We'll
Absolutely.
be trying to work out vengeance, being vindictive, and trying to do all that stuff. Here it is again. You using all that energy towards that person. Take that energy that you're using and work on yourself
Bettering
with. So
yourself.
there you go.
Today we had the wonderful Aleechea Pitts. And thank you so much, Pastor Pitts, for being on the MR podcast. We had
Blessings.
a
Thank you for
very
having me.
in-depth conversation. And
Yes.
honestly, I think this could extend to a whole nother podcast, because
Yeah, it's so in depth. When I do workshops, at one point I did 3 days, and one of the pastors was like, "This wasn't enough," and I said, "I tried to tell y'all, we need at least like 5 days because it's so in depth. Like
hmm
we're touching the surface because there are some people, when I've done a workshop, they
mm,
thought they had forgiven, and after going through that workshop,
Lord, I
they
know they was.
hadn't. I remember I was up teaching, right? The pastor broke out and started crying, and the wife looking at him like, "What's wrong with you?" But I
Ugh.
knew what was going on because as I'm teaching, things are unfolding, and people are like,
hmm
"Man, I really thought I had forgiven, and I haven't." So it's that very very in depth piece.
Today we have a very powerful guest, Aleechea Pitts. We thank you. We hope that as the listeners, you enjoyed this podcast. Hopefully, it has, brought some revelation to you. Maybe God has spoken to you through this podcast, and it can actually be helpful for your work that you may need to do in your personal life.
Mhm.
And thank you so much for tuning in to the MR podcast on this Saturday and spending time with us. Please listen and download and share with others. And we are ending.